Moving the classroom online, detailed by Paloff and Pratt. Facilitating online education is the main role of the online teacher. We take a slightly different role in the online classroom than we would have in the regular face-to-face classroom. In the regular face-to-face classroom, sometimes a teacher plays the role of the dispenser of knowledge, sometimes plays the role as a guide to knowledge acquisition. But in the online classroom, we're really facilitating education because we don't have that live one-on-one contact with our students. So we really need to guide them to the education. So it's a very discovery-based model when you look at online education, because a lot of the emphasis for learning is placed on the student. The teacher is there to help the student, but all in all, really the student needs to be their own, almost their own teacher. We're there to help them, but they have to put forth a lot of the effort to make the learning happen. We need to encourage students to participate in discussions. We need to make sure that they're meeting their posting requirements, and not only just participating in the discussions, but also making sure that they're actually talking to the other students in class. That interaction is very important for our online students because it helps to keep them engaged, and it helps to keep them feeling as though they're a part of the class. And we need to provide different learning opportunities for students. So we need to cater to all three learning styles, to the kinesthetic learners, to the visual learners, and to the auditory learners. That's why using different methods of giving knowledge to students is very effective. Using video, using print, using outside web resources. These are all great ways to facilitate learning for all three different learning styles. And we need to provide authentic assessments to our students, because making the assessment environment for the online student more more authentic will provide a more effective means of gauging what the student knows and what the student does not know. Roles and functions. The instructor has several roles and functions, and so does a student. First of all, the facilitator of learning. We already talked about that on the last slide. We create the rules and the guidelines for the students. We interact with the students, and we provide the expert knowledge for the class. The students, on the other hand, become active participants. This changes from the regular classroom, where many times the student is more of a passive participant. They must be an active participant in the online classroom. They suggest improvements for rules and guidelines, and also for the operation of the course. They interact with students as well, and also with the teacher, and they build and expand their knowledge in the online course. Building the online community. It's important to allow for personal and social interactions in the course. This is very much the same way that we allow for this type of interaction in a regular classroom. Think about all the social and personal interactions that happen in hallways in between classes. In an online classroom, you miss that. So by putting a resource out there for the student, like a social or personal area where the students can talk to each other, can be very effective because it allows them to have that social interaction that a lot of students want. Recognizing and responding to student input. So it's important that we allow the students to give us input, but even more important than allowing the students to give us input is that we actually listen to the input and do something with it instead of just filing it away. So when the student sees their input in action, it makes them feel very empowered. It makes them feel very good that they've been able to suggest something to the teacher, and the teacher's actually put it into action. So how can we do this? Well, ask the student questions. Ask them how we can improve the class. Ask them what we can do to make this a better learning experience for them. And also get their feedback on assignments, assessments, anything that you're doing in the class, because after all, if the assignment or assessment is above what the student can actually do, that may be a reason why you see a poor grade for that student, because maybe they just didn't understand the assignment. And do we use group projects for this? Again, we've discussed in a previous video that group projects can be very effective in online courses because it helps the students to feel connected to one another instead of just feeling all alone inside the online classroom. And live collaboration. using something like Illuminate or Wimba Classroom or Blackboard Collaborate, WebEx GoToMeeting, anything like this allows live synchronous interaction between you and your students. Even as something as simple as a Skype conversation between you and your students can help the students to feel like they're part of a community instead of just a face behind the screen. Defining outcomes and objectives. The most effective way to do this is to use the ADDIE model. And if you forget the ADDIE model or you need to see those steps again, just refer to the video earlier in the course that shows you the ADDIE model, and then I'll walk you through the steps again. Always work with your end in mind when you're designing your instructions. So where do you want the students to get? If you have that end point in mind, designing the course and designing the steps along the way becomes much easier. And consider how the students will demonstrate their mastery in the online format. So what types of assessments are you going to use? So again, working with the end in mind, what types of assessments will you use to have the students demonstrate their mastery? And consider giving students options for assessments as well, because this can allow the students to really draw upon their strengths and what they do well to show you that they also understand the content. Sequencing the course. The course should be sequenced in a very logical order. This just makes sense. I know it probably seems redundant to even say this, but having things appear in a logical order and in a systematic manner makes things easier for online students. And again, we don't want to make things more difficult for online students. We want to facilitate the education for them. So we're not really doing anything different in the online course that we would do in a regular course, because we would still do this for our on-ground students. Again, we just want to make it a little bit simpler for the student to be able to engage in the course. Provide structure for the students. One thing that I always suggest to people is that when you teach online, you adopt a more linear approach. Think like a behaviorist. You know, do step 1, then step 2, then step 3, then step 4, step 5, etc., etc. This seems to work very well for online students because it helps to keep them on task, and it helps them to keep their priorities in order, and also allows them to know what they should be doing next, and you know, just gives them a general flow and idea of how the course goes. And then they can start to anticipate that in further weeks as well. Be explicit with what you want the students to do. In fact, be overly explicit with what you want the students to do. Again, you don't see them face to face, so you have to understand that they need a lot of direction when it comes to the course. So give detailed directions, and I suggest using a lot of rubrics, because then the student understands exactly what you want. And essentially, what this all boils down to is become a behaviorist. Okay, follow a linear path throughout your course, sequence your content, and it will make it a much easier experience for both you and your students. Course activities. Activities should relate directly to the goals and objectives of the course. Again, this seems like common sense, but it's something that that does need to be said. Your goals and objectives should guide what the activities do. Okay, so anything that you give the student to do in the class, whether it be reading or a homework or assignment or an outside project, anything like that, should relate directly to a goal or objective in your course syllabus. Take a business approach to your course. Okay, I'm not saying that we operate as a business, but if you think of your students as customers, and I know that's probably a really bad analogy, but if you think of your students as customers and you as a business owner does anything and everything that they can to please their customers. And this is essentially really what we want to do with our students, is we want to give them what they need to be successful, and that is what is going to please them, is being successful in the class. So, and I'm not saying that we need to give students grades or inflate grades, but we need to do everything that we can to ensure that they're successful. So, again, giving them enough resources that they can go out and do these and be successful in the course on their own. So that goes back to the previous slide. Be overly explicit in what you want the students to do. Bring the resources to the students. Whenever you can, bring what you want the students to use to them through a web link, through directions on how to find it. Again, we don't want the students to get lost in cyberspace looking for resources for the class, so we want to bring those resources into the students as much as we can. And don't forget about collaboration. Collaboration is very important in the online class, whether that be through threaded discussion or group assignments or through some sort of journaling project. It's important to get the students talking to each other, because then they feel connected to the class, then they feel connected to the curriculum, and they're less likely to fall behind because there is an ongoing discussion happening in the class. So how does this all fit in? This fits in your overall course design. So it's important to keep these activities in mind when you're designing your course. In fact, this goes directly to the design step in ADDIE. This is where all of these points would fall into that design step in ADDIE, where you're actually designing your instructional materials. So try to keep these bullet points in mind when you're working on that stage. Also, another thing to think about is, why am I doing it? Why am I doing this activity in the course? Why is it important? We should be able to justify those things to ourselves when we give students something to do in the class. If we can't, if we as the teacher don't understand or can't explain why a certain activity is important to the student and why it's important for their learning, then we need to consider whether or not that activity is even valuable for the course. So in an online course, again, remember that time becomes a huge issue in an online course, especially for you and also for the students, because again, we read and type much more slowly than we can speak and listen. So you have to consider that in an online course, things are slowed down a little bit because of the processing delay between reading and typing and speaking and listening. So we have to make sure that whenever we put activities out there for the students, that they are appropriate and that they are a good use of that student's time. Building the course site. Make the syllabus clearly visible. So that should be one of the very first things the student sees, and it should always be visible in the course so the student can always refer back to it. Because remember, that syllabus is a contract between you and the students. Set guidelines, procedures early and make them prominent. Again, this could even be part of your syllabus, or it can be a completely different section of the course, but make sure that they're out there, that the student can see them, the student can always see them, and they know right where to get them. Be sure your contact information is available. Next to your syllabus and your guidelines and procedures, this is probably the most important thing in the course, because if the student has problems, they need to know how to get in touch with you. So whether that be by telephone or by email or, stopping into your classroom to see you, they need to know how to do that, and they also need to know what times of the day are appropriate to contact you, and also how soon they should expect a response from you. Your instructor expectations are important, so whatever you expect of your students, make sure that that is prominent in the course somewhere and the student understands what you expect them to learn and what you expect them to do in the classroom. And student expectations, what the student can expect of you, is also important for the students to be able to see. And all of this can be built into your syllabus, or it can be broken out into different sections. It's completely up to you. This is kind of a design option. So if you have any questions about this, please post them in the threaded discussion below. Also, take some time, read the threaded discussion question, and make sure you post the response there, and also post a couple responses to your peers as well.